back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys! So I'm here today to wrap up the fourth set of SPFBO titles that I've read, which means my total that I've read so far is actually above 2/3 of the way, which is great. I've actually read nearly all of them now. I've only got a couple more to go, I think like 7 maybe, so quite close to the end. But this is my fourth batch, so let's get into it. As always, there was a bit of a mixed batch in this one. So the first two I DNF'd, and the first one I'm going to talk about is The Fall of Wrath by Gavin South. This book was one that I really wanted to like because I started out intrigued. It follows a world where we have two incredibly powerful sisters and they are ruling over the land of Heir, and they are quite notoriously, I wouldn't say evil necessarily, but kind of evil. They are very harsh and they have a very strong, firm hand over their rule, shall we say. So we follow a young man who's sent to kind of engage with them and hopefully negotiate with them, and he goes and he is attempting to charm them, but he ends up making one of the sisters fall in love with him and the other one get incredibly jealous, which means that it's going to start off some sort of crazy civil war, and that's kind of where I gave up on the book. My issue with it was that it felt very slow to start off. It didn't really get into the action at all for a long time, and when it did, it still didn't keep me interested. I never felt like I was compelled to pick it up. It's not a bad book, it just wasn't interesting enough for me. It just didn't have enough originality to make it stand out from the other books I'd been reading recently. It didn't feel like there was anything too exciting happening, and I wanted more from it. It's not like, the writing was fine, the stylistic choices and the plot and stuff was fine, I just needed more, and I didn't feel like I got that. I actually read to about 20% of this. I did think the build was quite slow going, and I just didn't feel any connection to the characters, and that's really something I struggle with. If I don't connect with the characters, then I'm probably not going to like the book. So for me, it needed more development, it needed more to really pull the reader in and make them actually care and connect, but I didn't finish it, so I haven't rated it necessarily. It probably would have got a 2 stars if it stayed on the same sort of path that it was on. The next one I've already spoken a little bit about. This is The Heir to the Sundered Crown. Again, it feels like it could be very good if it continued, but it's very classic fantasy. It's heavily reliant on many of the fantasy tropes and stereotypes that you see in lots of different fantasy books, so it doesn't feel overly original. It does feel like there is something missing that could pull you in. Again, it's a similar problem where the ideas are fine, the writing is fine, there wasn't any issue with that, but it just didn't feel developed enough. It didn't feel like it was offering me something different or something that was going to really captivate my attention, and that's what I wanted it to do. I just felt like it wasn't really drawing me in, and I felt no real urge to pick it up. One element that I will note about this that is slightly different from sort of classic high fantasies is it did have like zombies and werewolves, which I more often associate with sort of urban fantasy, whereas I would definitely put this into high fantasy above urban fantasy because it's very focused on like castles and kings and rulers and things like that. It didn't feel like an urban fantasy until the werewolves and the zombies showed up, which was a bit random, I'm not gonna lie. It wasn't a bad book by any means, but again, it probably would only have got 2 stars had I continued, so I didn't really get very far. I got about 25% of the way with it, and then I just decided it wasn't for me. Moving on to the books that I did finish, the first of those was Showdown, which is a weird little book. It's a kind of weird western, I'd say. It does have a few very slight sci-fi elements, but it didn't really feel that different from a western story. It's very short, and that was my biggest issue with this one, was it felt like it was the beginning of a story. It felt like chapter 1. It didn't feel like a complete story by any means, and I believe it's not a complete story because I think the idea with this series is that the author is publishing different bits of the book as it goes on, and then they'll publish a bind-up edition. For me, that didn't work because I wanted the entire story. I felt like this was only the beginning, and I didn't really see enough of the characters. I didn't really see enough of the world or enough of the magic or enough of the whole idea. I just felt like I'd very, very lightly touched the surface and then it was over, and it felt very rushed at the ending. it just wasn't for me. It really felt like it needed to be the entire book rather than just chapter 1, and I didn't feel like I got that. So I gave it 2 stars. It's okay, but I wouldn't say it was one of my favourites. It follows Graham the gunslinger, who is a sorcerer with a couple of interesting magical skills. He has to face down an outlaw, and that's basically all that happens. The next book I read was one that I gave 3 stars to, so I actually liked this one, which is good. This is called The Eighth God, and it's actually about orcs, largely. So it does rely on some of the fantasy tropes, like stereotypical orcish characters. Quite a lot of different characters that we're following, and for me that was a slight issue because I feel like there are lots of characters and not enough time spent on each individual character to sort of really develop them. But we have about 7, I think, that we're following. We have Saorith, who is an orc slayer, Melres, who is a battle mage and also possibly an orc slayer, Tiara, orc slayer and ex-orc lover, Kelpa, who is the captain of some guards, Kor, who is a raven, Eloe, who is a tormentor turned protector, and Lucy, who is a dead girl returned. Those are like my way of describing them. It's not like how the authors describe them. They're how I've described them. Each of them kind of brings quite a different point of view, which is nice, and I feel like we do get a good look at the world in this book because there is quite a lot of different stuff happening in different places. I just didn't feel like the characters were developed enough. I have to admit, it did have its issues in terms of like grammar and the way that it was structured in the sentences. There were some clunky writing moments, and I think that this definitely would benefit from a sort of copy editor or something going through it a couple of times and really helping to solidify some of the ideas. But with that said, it still had some interesting twists and things that I didn't necessarily anticipate, and I liked the fact that it was quite expansive and it tried a lot of things. It didn't necessarily pull all of them off, but I think it was good that it tried, if that made sense. The other negative for me personally was the lack of sort of detail. I feel like there was something missing with each of the characters and something missing with the world as a whole to really bring it to life. I think probably just more description would have helped because it was quite action-packed. There's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of battles with orcs and bloodshed, which is fine, but I just wanted a little bit more going on in the background to really flesh the world out as well. Overall, I think it just about scraped a 3 stars from me. It was kind of borderline, but I did like it, so I'm giving it a 3 and being generous. Moving on to the final one, which is my winner for this round. That is Umbra by Toby Bennett. This book I did not expect to like at all from the cover. I'm not going to lie, I am a bit judgmental when it comes to self-published covers because some of them are horrendous, and this one, a lot of you guys actually said that you really liked it when I showed it. I didn't like it at all, but with that said, I really liked the book, and I think this book with some work from a publisher or an editor would really be fun. It follows the world of Umbra, or the city of Umbra, where shadows are separated from people and they can become slag. Slag is kind of this magical element that is used to run all the machinery and all the different stuff in this city, and as time has gone on and the people of this world have kind of switched over to slag, the city has got more and more depressing. It's a very oppressive place to live, it's very nasty, it feels very hostile, people get very down and low, but they don't really know why. They don't quite understand that it's actually the slag that is affecting them. We follow a young boy who works in a slag factory. He is called Edmund, and we're following it from his point of view when he is an adult. He's actually a grandfather, and he's telling his grandson all about the adventure that he had in Umbra and how different it used to be when he was young from how it is currently. Edmund is a really fun character. I love the concept, when it's done well, of an older character telling a story to a younger character, like a chronicler or a bard or some grandfatherly fellow. I really enjoy that. That is a trope that I personally like if it's done well, and I feel like in this book it is, because it's not overly heavily handed. It feels like it was natural when we had the breaks for them to talk in present day, and then we also had the kind of goings on in the past where he's on this big adventure. So we're following Edmund, who is one day walking home from his shift, and he is actually met with a shadow. A shadow doesn't usually sort of talk to someone or be on its own in the street. It's usually either attached to a person or being made into slag. So he's very surprised to meet the shadow, and she tells him that she has escaped from the factory where he works and she needs help, and he ends up kind of getting involved in a chase with her, trying to help her get away from the captors and the mad scientist who works in his factory, but of course equally they are his bosses, so he's very terrified he's going to lose his job. It's really, really good fun in terms of the magic. I really like the concept of the shadows being separated and the factory and the steam and the power. It feels like a really genuine sort of Victorian, pseudo-Victorian setting, which I loved. And I personally love steampunk, so this really reminded me of that, but in its own way. It definitely feels like it's a sort of oppressive, sinister place to live. It feels like the atmosphere on this book was very right. My only issue was that it definitely needs copy editing or something like that to bring it up to a really, really good book. I did like it a lot. I feel like there's so much potential here. I just don't feel like it's quite met the potential that it has, if that makes sense. But I really enjoyed it, and I definitely feel like this is a book that's worth reading for sure. So I gave this one 4 stars, and this is my winner of the round. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Peter Pan in a way, and like the shadow separating from Peter Pan in the Disney version. I really enjoy that concept, and I just think it was definitely playing with that idea of shadows and what it means to be half a person and stuff. It was very cool. I liked it a lot, and it was a good fun adventure. So yeah, I would recommend that one. I'd love to know in the comments what you guys think of the ones I've talked about, whether you agree from the sounds of the plot with me or whether you're going to pick any of them up, even the ones I didn't like. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will be back fairly soon with my next update because I've only got to read, I think, 2 more before I can do that. So I will update you guys soon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.